This is the last video for this unit about the counter app. What I'm going to show you is that the counter app is not limited to being just a counter app. Okay, so we're going to make something called a flag raising app. It's going to be pretty cool because this flag raising app is something that we came up with during the COVID era when all our classes were being held online. And you know that in some schools, right, students are expected to stand in front of a flag and they'll sing a national anthem and the flag gets raised, and this is morning assembly. And this went away during COVID because they didn't want people to gather. So we made a virtual flag raising app for people to do this on their own if they're so inclined. Nobody actually sang, but the idea is there. And the great thing is you don't need to change a lot of code from your counter in order for this to work. So let's try this out. First thing I'd like you to do is I would like you to make a copy of this app. Okay, so I don't want you to edit this app. So let's go back to the home screen, okay, by pressing back. And I'm going to ask you to duplicate this. So tap and hold, choose duplicate. Okay, so now you have a different copy and you can do whatever you want with it. All right, so I'm going to rename this to over here. Rename this to Flag Raising Explorers. Okay, so that's one way to have a bit of a backup of your work. All right, so I'm going to tap on this. Now I can change this into the flag raising app. Let me show you what the flag raising app is about. All right, so over here, you can see that I have a bit of layout to set up. Okay, so down here, you can see on the left-hand side, this is what my app looks like. I have a number over here. It's still got a counter, but I have this flagpole. I have a flag. I still have a button, and I still have some lyrics down here for a message that I want to show. Okay, maybe you can put the national anthem depending on how far up your flag is. And this is how it's laid out. There's a V stack followed by a text. Okay, and there's a rectangle, a text, and it's all inside an H stack. There's a button over here and a piece of text. Okay, if you think you can set this up, go ahead. I'm going to run through it right now in the next slide. Okay, so let's set it up. All right, so first thing we want to do is I'm going to just get rid of this meows over here, right? And I'm going to decrease the font size of this by removing the modifier. Okay, the increase button stays, but in between, I'm going to need a couple more things. Well, first thing is I guess I don't really need decrease anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. So let's get rid of all my decrease button code. Okay, so that's all the way until the end of the if statement down here. We can leave this check counter. Okay, maybe we can still use it. But down here, what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to create an H stack. Okay, and this H stack is going to contain my flagpole as well as a flag. Okay, so the flagpole, I'm going to make it out of a simple rectangle shape. All right, you might recall we had a circle shape back when we were doing a mask. A rectangle shape is a shape that is a rectangle. It just fills up as much space as it can with a single rectangle. I'm going to make it a little bit skinnier by using a modifier called frame. So frame, open bracket, width of, let's say, 10. Okay, and now I have a flagpole, right? Pretty straightforward. Next, I want my flag, and that's just a piece of text over here. Inside here, I'm going to put the flag. So I'm going to put a Singapore flag over here. Search for Singapore. And there we go. It's a little bit small, so I'm going to increase the font size, .font, .system, size of maybe 100. Okay, so that's pretty decent. It's floating in the air and away from the flagpole. So to fix that, I'm going to go to my H stack over here and add some parameters. If you press open bracket, you can choose from a couple of things. You can choose the alignment. Right, alignment, I'm going to say alignment to the bottom so that the flag starts at the bottom. And I'm going to set the spacing. All right, the spacing is how far apart these things are inside the H stack. So I'm going to say spacing, :10. I think that should put them together. All right, that's pretty good. Now I have a flagpole where the flag is at the bottom. And we're going to actually use this same counter code to move it to the top. So I'm going to ask you to pause and make sure that you have your flag all set up before you move on to the next bit. Okay, so now let's see if we can actually get the flag moving, shall we? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to this new modifier, and this modifier is called offset. Okay, so offset, what it does is it takes something and it moves it away a certain amount from its original position. So the way you do an offset is as follows. You can do dot offset, open bracket, and you can choose an X or a Y value to offset. So let me just show you. X colon 10, Y colon 10. What that does is it takes the flag and moves it in the X-axis by 10. Okay, so if you've done any coordinate geometry, this should be familiar to you. And it also moves it in the Y direction by 10. Now there's one thing I need to point out, and that's the fact that Y actually increases downwards. So if I put Y of 100, it's actually going to move downwards. So what we actually want to do is we want to raise the flag by setting Y to be less and less. We're going to use negative numbers and it's going to decrease and go upwards. So let's just check that real quick. We don't need to have an X offset. We're just going to have a Y offset of, let's say, negative 100. And that should actually move it up. So I think it should end at about negative 400. Oh, that's kind of ridiculous. Maybe negative 300 or negative 360 or something like that. Okay, negative 350. Okay, so for my screen is negative 350. If you're using a different iPad, it might be slightly different. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to link this counter over here with this value over here. Every time we tap the button, we want the offset to decrease. Okay, so maybe we want it such that after about 35 taps, then the flag will reach the top. Okay, so the way we can do that is as follows. We can just take this and say negative 10 times counter. Okay, you would think that would work, but we actually get an error. All right, so first of all, why would you think it works? Because negative 10 times 0 means the offset is 0. So negative 10 times 1 is negative 10. Negative 10 times 2, negative 20. And if you do it 35 times, you get negative 350 is at the top. Okay, but there's a bit of an error. Let's see what it is. This error says cannot convert value of type int to expected argument type CG float. All right, so there's a fix, and I would like you to not press that just yet. I need to explain what's going on. Now, Swift is a strongly typed language. That means this number over here is an integer. Okay, an integer is a whole number. You probably learned about those. But down here, offset expects something called a floating point number. Okay, a floating point number is a number with decimals on it. In computers, these are different. An integer and a floating point number are actually different things. Okay, so the best way to fix this is really just to convince Swift that counter is a floating point number as well. Then the way we do that is by typing 0.0. Okay, that's the fix for this. By doing that, counter starts off as 0.0, and when you put it inside here, you are giving a floating point number to Y, and it's perfectly happy about it. All right, so let's press this. Okay, there we go. It actually moves the flag up. Okay, ignore the part about feeding the cat. That's perfectly fine. All right, but we can change those messages later on. So up to you. You might want to change these things to something patriotic and put in like the national anthem or something like that. For now, I'll leave the cat bit over here. It's quite amusing. But now you can see that we have made an entire flag raising app using pretty much the same code as before. Okay, and the key thing is that we're using this counter in a creative way. We're using it to change the offset of this flag. Okay, you can actually use this with different modifiers as well. Maybe you can change the scale of the flag, right? Let me just demonstrate that real quick. So I'm going to go down here, press dot scale effect, open bracket, and for this I'm going to say counter times, okay, because it's at 0, counter times maybe 0.5. All right, so I'm just going to show you this real quick. I'm going to remove this because it's kind of weird. All right, because what it does is it will change it from size 0 to size 0.5, and it'll change it to, after that, size 1, then size 1.5, and it'll get larger and larger and larger each time you press it. Okay, so that's not quite what we want, but this is something that I'd like you to think about, because maybe you can make some kind of interesting effect. Maybe not with a flag, but maybe with something that moves across the screen and changes color and things like that. Let me just give you a few more modifiers to play with. Okay, so that scale effect, I'm going to press Command/, Okay, command slash will comment out this line of code, which means it disappears from Swift, but it's still there for you if you want to refer to it. Okay, it's a comment. You can press command slash to bring it back, or command slash for it to go away. All right, there's a couple more. There's rotation effect. Okay, and for rotation effect, you need to say dot degrees bracket followed by the rotation that you want. So I'm just going to put counter times 10. Okay, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. It's a little bit strange. Your flags should not behave like these, but maybe something else might. Okay, so this thing just says, hey, rotate it by, at this point, 70 degrees. Let's comment this out as well. And I'll show you one more, which is opacity. Okay, so opacity just is a value between 0 and 1 about how opaque it is. So maybe you want your flag to fade out or fade in. So I'm just going to say counter times 0.1 because it starts at 0 and we want it to increase to 1. So let's try this real quick. Right, so your flag actually fades in nicely. Okay, so all of these are different ways of using a counter to manipulate something on screen. And who's to say that this counter just manipulates one thing, or that you only have one button? Maybe you can have two buttons that change different things. Okay, so I'd like you to think about that and make something interesting out of this flag raising tutorial. There's one last thing I want to show you. So I'm going to go down here and type in with animation, open curly brace, and I'm going to move counter equals counter plus 1 into the with animation block. Okay, so I like to call these curly braces blocks. All right, so it's inside here. And now what happens when I press the button? Look very carefully. All right, instead of the flag just like disappearing from one place and reappearing in another, it actually moves up smoothly. Okay, it actually animates smoothly. Okay, which is a pretty nice effect. I'd like you to also try this. You can actually do the same thing by putting check counter inside with animation. So I'm going to cut this, put it inside here. Okay, the indentation is wrong. I'm going to press Control I, and let's see whether that changes anything. Okay, notice that my text now actually fades in rather than just appearing. Okay, so you can do some pretty interesting things with animations. All right, let's bring back the rotation effect real quick just to see what it's like. Again, I'm using command slash. And now, if I do this, it actually rotates with animation. Okay, so let's not leave it in this weird state. All right, let's bring back the opacity, but not the rotation effect. Okay, so this thing is how you do animations in SwiftUI. Every time you change a variable, you can say, well, I want to do this change with animation. So this is what Swift is like. You can actually write it out like you would English language. You say with animation, counter equals counter plus 1, and check counter. Okay, so that's it for this little flag raising app. I hope you had fun making it. Let me just quickly show you what else you can do with this concept over here. This is something from one of my students from back in the day. It's a simple little shooting game where, as you can see, you press a button and it shoots some kind of bullet into some kind of enemy that changes color, and the health actually decreases. Okay, so it's actually just the counter app. That's what's really remarkable about this. It's really just a counter app. And I'd like to see what you can come up with your imagination. Alright, that's it for this series of videos. I'll see you in the next one.